Shalom, family. Today's topic will be about courageous. We're going to be looking more into what the word means. And so, just going to do some basic housekeeping. Number one, if you love this, share it. If you have questions, ask them. And if you want to go on the email list, make sure you subscribe on the first page of the website. Number four, if you have comments and concerns, please be free. This is not a square table. This is a round table where we all help to edify one another. And last but not least, don't forget to always be the light. All right, so the word for courageous is the Hebrew word Amets. And this is spelled with an aleph, a mem, and a sadi. And remember, Hebrew or Ivrit, it goes in the opposite direction of English. So the first letter is going to be on the right, and it's going to go from right to left. This word is, it means to be stout, strong, bold, or alert, and it's often translated as courageous, steadfastly minded, strengthened, and less frequently it's translated as determined, hardened, increases, made obstinate, made firm, or made haste. And this is going to be Strong's number 553 for anybody who wants to look it up on their own. This right here, you'll see the phonetic spelling in English as well as the modern Hebrew or Ivrit and the Paleo Ivrit. And whenever we're trying to better understand a word, it's best for us to go to the Hebrew to get a more in-depth analysis of the word. And so looking at this word Amets, we see that each letter or symbol has several meanings that help us to come to a better understanding. So this ox head, this first letter or symbol right here, it can mean strong, power, or leader. The mem, which is the second letter or symbol, it can mean water, chaos, mighty, or blood. And the sadi, which is the last letter or symbol, it can mean trail, journey, chase, or hunt. And so each symbol or letter also has a numerical value. And so for the aleph, we have a numerical equivalent of 1. The mem has a numerical equivalent of 40. And the sadi has a numerical equivalent of 90 for a total of 131. And so when I study these words, I also want to look at words that have the same numerical value as this word, because oftentimes it helps me to better understand the word. And so what I found interesting is that a word that had the same numerical value as this word courageous or Amets is the word Elimelech, which means God is my king. So right off the bat, we see that God being a king is associated somehow with courageousness or courage. And so we don't know much about Elimelech. We know that he's from Judah, but I want to ask you all a question. Where do we hear about Elimelech? If you see it in the book of Ruth, you are absolutely correct. So for a majority of this video, we are going to be spending a lot of time in the book of Ruth, and we might hop around maybe towards the end. We're going to get into the first and second mentions of it next, but for the most part, we're going to be in the book of Ruth. So when looking at a word, we always want to look at the first mention of the word, because the first mention of it is going to pretty much describe what the word is truly intended to mean. And so in Genesis 25:23, when Rebekah is pregnant with Esau and Jacob, we see that the Most High tells her that you have two nations and one's going to be stronger than the other. So the word stronger right here is the Hebrew word Amets. And so we see right off the bat, courageous is or Amets is associated with strength. And so we usually see this as a positive attribute. But we can see in the second mention that this word also can be used in a negative way. And so here we see in Deuteronomy 25:23, this is obviously when Moses is retelling the story for the children of Israel right before they make it into the promised land. And he's like telling them everything that has occurred from the moment they left Egypt, being in the wilderness up until now. And so he's saying, he's telling them about how Sihon, the king of Heshbon, wouldn't let them pass, but the Most High hardened his heart so that he could deliver Sihon into the hands of the children of Israel. And so what I want to encourage everyone to do is when you don't know what these names mean, like Sihon and Heshbon, look them up, because more times than not, they have meanings that give the passage more depth, and it helps us to really understand things on a spiritual level. So when I looked up Heshbon, it means stronghold, and Sihon means warrior. So we have this warrior of the stronghold, and we know that strongholds represent anything that keeps us from moving or being moved. And so the Most High has made Sihon's heart obstinate just so that he could deliver him into the hands of the children of Israel. Now, that was for the children of Israel. The same way that the Most High hardened Pharaoh's heart, right? He does it again. And so what I find is interesting is that the scriptures say that the Most High is a stronghold for us. So a stronghold can be a positive thing or a negative thing, but more times we see it associated with a negative thing. But just for the word Amets, it can be used in a positive way or a negative way. And we're going to look at the positive way in Ruth and see more of how it's used in that context. So we know that Elimelech and this idea of God being my king is also associated with the word Amets. And so we're going to go into the book of Ruth and explore it a little bit more deeply. And before I have you all read chapter 1, I want to ask this question, little scripture trivia. Whose great grandmother does Ruth become? If you all said King David or Dawid, then you are absolutely correct. And we know that from there, that's where Hamashiach or the Messiah, Yahushua, Jesus, whatever you call him, that's where he eventually comes from. So I am going to let you all read Ruth chapter 1, and you can pause it here and then come back when you are finished, and we will move forward. All right, so hopefully you read Ruth chapter 1, and we see in the first 3 chapters that we don't really know much about Elimelech, but that he has 2 sons, a wife, and they moved to Moab because of a famine. We know before we started reading the chapter that his name means Yah is king, and I guess that's really all we need to know about Elimelech. But when you go through Ruth 4 through 14, you see that the sons take on wives from the land, and then the sons die, and Naomi tells her daughter-in-laws to go back home because she doesn't have any more sons to give them. And so we know that it was a part of our custom to marry the next son in the event that your husband died. And so it was expected that if you marry the next son, that first child would really belong to that of the deceased husband. And so Naomi is basically saying, I don't have any more sons to give you. I'm old. And so Orpah, she goes back. And if you want to really like trip out on this, you can go look up the origins and the name of Orpah, and also look up what Ruth means. And it gets really trippy. But Ruth chooses to stay with Naomi. And so we're going to read from Ruth 1, 16 through 18. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So she stopped talking to her after she realized she had made up her mind. Okay. So Ruth right here is saying, nothing's going to depart me from you but death. Your God will be my God. So she is making a conscious decision to serve the God of Israel. And so this steadfastly minded is the word Amets. And so right here in the first chapter, we see that Elimelech, whose name is Yah, is king. He dies, and then his daughter-in-law makes up her mind that Yah is going to be her king and that she's going to stick with Naomi. And so courageous right here, or Amets, is this decision to have your mind made up. Now, I want to ask the question, why didn't many of the children of Israel make it into the promised land once the spies came back from scoping out the land? The scriptures say that they were discouraged. So they did not have their mind made up. And so that was a problem for the Most High. Why? Because he is king. And when he says that he's going to give you the land, then your mind needs to be made up. You shouldn't be discouraged. All right. And so we can go on and read chapter 2. You can pause it here and then come back and we'll talk about it. All right, so hopefully you've read Ruth chapter 2, and I find it interesting that even with Elimelech being dead, you see throughout this book that they keep his name alive. They mention Elimelech all throughout this book. And so we have Ruth, who has chosen to go with her mother-in-law. And so she's telling her mother-in-law that I'm going to go glean today. And she goes out into the land to glean. Now, if anybody knows what gleaning is, it is basically getting the leftovers from the field. And so not only is this something usually that the poor people and the foreigners do, but this is something that was commanded of Israel in Leviticus 23, I think, maybe chapter 23, maybe verse 22, I'm not sure, but this was something that Israel was commanded to do, was to leave crops aside for the poor and for the foreigners. And so she's going to go collect crops for her and her mother-in-law. And so we see that she's made up her mind that she's going to take care of her mother-in-law, if that means gleaning. And so what I find interesting in this chapter is Ruth chapter 2:11. Boaz sees her in the field, and so they have this exchange, and she's like, well, why are you being nice to me? And then Boaz answers her, and he says, it hath fully been showed me all thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thy husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knowest not heretofore. And the Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. So this always blows my mind, because we know we're not And at this time, there's no Instagram, there's no TV or anything. So how has something fully been shown to Boaz? That's the question that I want to pose to you all. I would submit that the Most High, this was revealed to him in spirit. It was fully showed to him who she was and what she had done. Because he even goes on to say that the Lord is going to recompense your work. You're going to be given a full reward. So how would he know all of this unless it was showed to him? And at this point, I feel like once I've read through this a few times, I feel like at this point, Boaz already knew what was going to happen. But he probably just had to be obedient to the Most High and follow this thing through the way the Most High wanted it to be followed through. And then he reiterates that because she chose to serve God, the God of Israel, it says, under whose wings thou art come to trust, right? So we go back to the children of Israel not making it into the promised land because they were discouraged. They weren't steadfast. They didn't trust the Most High. We see that she's going to be given a full reward because she's doing the opposite. She is having courage and she's choosing to trust the Yah of Israel. And so you can go on to read Ruth chapter 3 and pause it right here and come back when you are finished. And so in chapter 3, we see that Naomi tells Ruth to go down to Boaz after he eats and lay down at his feet and basically ask him to marry her. And what I find so interesting is that Ruth, she never argues about it. She never debates with her mother-in-law about what she was told to do. She just goes and she does it. And so that was a very, very courageous thing for her to do at that time period in which they were living in. I mean, I still feel like it would be very courageous of a woman to go and ask a man to marry her, lay at his feet and ask her to marry her. And so we see that she does what she's supposed to do. And Boaz wakes up and he's startled because he doesn't know who she is because she's like, she covered herself so people wouldn't know it was her going to lay next to the man because that was like a scandalous thing. And so he says to her, this is Ruth chapter 3:10. He said, blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people do know that thou art a virtuous woman. And she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came unto the floor. So he's preserving her dignity at this point. He's protecting her. And so we see a lot about Ruth. Outside of her being courageous, she's also a virtuous woman. She's not a respecter of persons. We see that he mentions that. She doesn't care whether somebody is rich or poor. She is who she is. And so basically he's telling her that she was kind in the beginning, but this is really a symbol of her kindness and her commitment. And I want to say something too, is that Boaz probably already knew he was going to marry her, but he may have been commanded to wait until she approached him, because there was probably something specific that the Most High wanted to stir up in Ruth. Number one, she's being obedient, right? And then number two, he's able to bring out that boldness in her that needed to be brought forth, right? Because we learned that courageous is a boldness that you need to have, a strength. So she was able to, the Most High was able to bring out that boldness in her. And by Boaz being obedient and probably waiting on her to approach him, everybody could come to their fullness in this situation. Because we know that ultimately through Ruth, God is going to bring about David. So there's a certain mindset that Ruth needs to be in. She has to be steadfast in her mind because this is going to continue the line to our salvation. And so you can go on and read chapter 4 and come back when you are finished. All right, so basically in this closing chapter, we see that Boaz is very smart about how he handles this kinsman redeemer. Now, he definitely knows that he's probably going to be the one to marry Ruth, but there's still certain customs in the land that he has to follow. And so, though sometimes the Most High may give us something to do, but there's still a certain specific way that we have to go about it, especially when we are abiding under specific laws of the land and things of that nature. And Boaz is a great example of this because he, even though he knows the outcome, he still has to go about it the way that he goes about it, which is going to be the custom of the people. And so he knew that there was a closer kinsman. And so he had to ask him first, did he want to be the person to redeem Ruth? And so he doesn't just say, oh, do you want to redeem Ruth? He's strategic about it. He goes and he asks him about the land first. And he says, do you want to redeem the land? And so we know that a kinsman redeemer, it can be in reference to a person, but it can also be in reference to land. Now, I want to ask the question, why might it be necessary to have a kinsman redeemer for land only? So if we're not just talking about any land, right? We're talking about the land that the Most High has given Israel. So what happens or what could happen if there isn't a kinsman redeemer is that the land could eventually get into the wrong hands, somebody who is not of Israel. So the kinsman redeemer is supposed to redeem the land so that it stays within Israel. And so Boaz presents this guy with this idea of this land that's his family members, and the guy says, yeah, I want the land or whatnot. And then he says, well, it comes with this person as well. And so the guy's like, no, I don't want it. And I can't handle all of that. I might lose my inheritance. And so Boaz gets to marry Ruth. And so we see in chapter 4:14, it says, and the woman said unto Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which have not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thy old age, for thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, have borne him. And so Naomi is blessed through this union, because remember, in the custom, the first child from the kinsman redeemer was assumed to belong to that of the deceased. So essentially, this is Naomi's great great grandson, which Ruth has given birth to. And so we know that this bloodline does go on to be famous in Israel. And we seen earlier on in the chapter that Ruth, was bitter, and she felt like, the Most High had brought these bad things upon her, and now she's being redeemed. And this is really you talk about redemption. This is really interesting because there are little hints of Jesus even within this story. But we're going to move forward. And so just to go back and kind of tie this in with the first mention of this word Amets, or strength, that we see in Genesis, we know that uh, Esau was very strong physically, and we know that he was very steadfast in mind and things of that nature. So it can definitely be, you can substitute really every word that is used to define Amets, you can substitute it in this first mention in Genesis, and it will still retain its meaning. It would still apply basically to the scripture. And so going back to the Paleo Hebrew or Ivrit, we can see that the strong leader allows us to be mighty on the journey. And if you look closely, it you can kind of see like that Sadi, the last symbol or letter, it looks like a person gleaning in a field. So you have the idea that, the Most High is the king, and he is over this, he's over the chaos that one might come into contact with on their journey. And so I just want to encourage you all that when you are on your journey and it might be chaotic, to stay steadfast in your mind. Have your mind made up to serve the Most High, and you will prevail. Don't be discouraged. If the Most High has given you a promise, stand fast on that. You know what I mean? And don't waver. Have your mind made up, because it is going to strengthen you. Be bold in the Most High. When we think about boldness, sometimes we think about crazy things that society might tell us that boldness is, like colorful hair or flamboyant clothing or things of that nature. But we see that Ruth, she was a virtuous woman, right? But she was bold. She was bold but virtuous. So you can be bold and virtuous. You can be steadfast in your mind and still composed. Still have the faith and still carry yourself in a way that is that promotes the relationship that you have with the Most High, and that is going to show people that Yah or God is your king. And so I just hope that this has blessed you as much as it has blessed me, and hopefully I get to talk to you again soon.